Welcome to your Get That Nugget for GCSE English Literature. Today we're going to again be focusing on how we use the list structure to plan our essays, focusing specifically on the Power and Conflict anthology. This session is here to complement your lessons with your teachers and not to replace them in any way. So last session we had a look at exposure and we unpicked it, looking at the list structure and which quotations we could use. We're going to do the same thing today, but with remains, and we're going to do it even more quickly and even more focused. We're going to use a much tinier space so that you can see how easy it is to plan your essays. We're going to be focusing again on the same essay question. So, how do the poets present experiences of conflict? Now, language, imagery, structure and theme. So language, we are looking for specific words, we are looking for semantic fields, we are looking for a type of word. So, again, much like exposure, we have a use of collective pronouns. We have that idea of a group mentality. In the case of this poem, that changes halfway through and we move from collective pronouns to the individual personal pronoun. And so we can see a shift in attitude. The group mentality becomes personal. Now, in terms of this poem, we understand that that is because of his shift in attitude. We understand that when he is out there, he is seeing everything as a group mentality. There is a shared blame, there is a shared guilt. However, when he is on his own at home, that guilt becomes overwhelming for him. And that links to PTSD, which ultimately is one of the biggest things this poem is trying to tell us. So in terms of linking that back to the question, experiences of conflict, it is about both mental and physical effects. So we're then looking for imagery. And we're looking for imagery that shows his experience of conflict. We've already identified that he is guilt-stricken by it and that there is a PTSD element to this. So in terms of imagery, we can look down here and we have a metaphor. So, blood linked to death or injury. Shadow as something that follows you and is dark. And then in terms of experiences of conflict, we can look back to that idea of PTSD and that the memory is following him. So then we move on to looking at structure. And the key thing in this poem is the volta, and we find the volta just over halfway through. A volta is a change in tone. So we've gone from this collective, casual tone, this casual approach to what's happened, to suddenly a change in how he views all of it, a change in how he is explaining all of it. So the Volta moves us from someone who doesn't care, who doesn't seem to have any understanding of what's happened. We have the Volta, and then that whole attitude towards the event changes. And it's at this point that we recognise that there is guilt, that the memory stays with him, and therefore we link back to the question, the experiences of conflict, and that idea of PTSD. In terms of building AO3 into this, we have the fact that all of this collection of poetry, which is called The Not Dead by Simon Armitage, has been written as persona poems based on real life experiences of servant army personnel. And then we get to theme, and it's at this point that we have that whole big idea that we can apply whatever quotation we want to this. And we've talked about the fact throughout that there is guilt, that there is this idea that it's following him, that the memory stays with him, the guilt remains, and therefore we come down to that final line, his bloody life in my bloody hands. In the first instance, you have the idea that he is responsible for this man's death. It is a metaphor, having someone's life in your hands. And it is also a reference to Lady Macbeth. This idea of guilt, this idea of blood on the hands, this idea of not being able to escape from that situation and that experience. And therefore, again, we come back to linking it to the question. It is PTSD. The wider picture with that is that possibly this man is feeling suicidal, as we know that Lady Macbeth committed suicide. And so we have this idea that the experience of conflict will create some sort of traumatic psychological impact. There will also be a long-term physical impact. And so people's experiences of conflict are almost entirely negative and can lead to both physical and mental problems. That then becomes the answer to your question, and that is a thesis statement. And so we've got our plan. Our plan all says the same thing, and it all links back to this question. So ultimately, our answer to this question that we are trying to prove throughout is that so conflict causes long-term physical and mental problems which are impossible to escape. And that thesis statement is the thing that you are going to spend your whole essay trying to prove. What we're going to look at in the next session is how you plan for 2 poems at a time, put them together, write that thesis statement and write your introduction, because you need to be able to put all of these moving parts together. But essentially, this is your plan. This is the answer to your question, and that is what you are trying to prove throughout your essay. What I want you to do is answer that question. That is essentially your language paragraph, and that links back to the question of how he experiences conflict. So the collective pronouns suggest what, and how does that link to his attitude to the looter? you can go on to explain how that changes, and that becomes your answer in your first paragraph.